So we've got a great panel with us and an opportunity to reflect on that key theme of collaboration with the topic that Renée outlined. I'm going to begin by inviting each of the panel members to introduce themselves briefly, no more than about a minute, just to say who you are and what your interest is in this topic. I should say that as the Chief Executive of the Scottish Wildlife Trust and also the Deputy Chair of the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital, my interest in this topic is healthy, resilient ecosystems supporting wildlife and people. And the Scottish Wildlife Trust began on this journey a few years ago. Back in 2013, we organised the World Forum on Natural Capital, and we ran that 3 times up until 2017 with a host of international partners. That was still very conceptual. That was followed with the Scottish Conservation Finance Project, which we teamed up with SEPA to deliver a host of stakeholders in Scotland, a very much more Scotland-focused endeavour. And now we're focusing on riverwoods to try and put some of these things into practice on the ground. So that's my interest in this topic. I'm going to invite David Young to introduce himself first to you all and share his interest in this topic, and then we'll move on to the other panelists who I'm going to invite to introduce themselves from left to right. So first of all to David.
Thanks, Jo. My name's David Young, and I'm a Senior Fellow with the Broadway Initiative. The Broadway Initiative is a collaboration of a range of environmental organisations and businesses looking at policy development to advance environmental improvement across the board. My particular interest is, I guess, long-standing. I started life as an environmental scientist and was a former founding executive director of Natural England. And I've come to the conclusion that a far greater emphasis on the role of markets would be a benefit for government in advancing the agenda for nature recovery, as we've watched nature recovery fail through the conventional methods of grants and agri-environment schemes over many years now.
Thank you very much, David. And let's move. I can't quite see in the room who is on the left. So if you would like to introduce yourselves from left to right, that would be helpful.
Yeah, Joe, I was just wondering what angle you'd be seeing it from and where the left started, but anyway, I'll go.
Thanks, David.
Saving the best to the last. This is the last session of the couple of days. My name is David Watt. I'm the chair of the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital, which is not quite unique, perhaps, but it appears to me to be a collaboration of people from the public sector, significant bodies in Scotland, a number of whom are represented here, the third sector, including the Scottish Wildlife Trust, and the private sector, including ICAS, the Accountants Association, the IOD, where I used to work for a number of years, and recently business and community. My interest really is in motivating the private sector to get signed up and active in this agenda. I'm not really a great talker. Well, I'm a great talker. I talk far too much, but I really want to see things happening, and I get a bit frustrated when they don't, to be honest.
Thank you, David. And thank you to the camera operator. I can see you all now. That's brilliant.
Hello, everybody. My name is Odile Conchou. I'm not from Scotland, as you can hear. I'm French, but I'm really happy to be here, and thank you to invite me. I'm working currently at the CBD, the UN CBD, that's the Secretariat for the Convention of Biological Diversity, based in Montreal. And in this secretariat, I'm in charge of difficult task, which is to link the financial sector with the CBD community, more or less. And that's quite new, honestly, and it's not so easy, but it's coming. And I'm there for 2 years, and before I was, and I will be back in some months, working at the French Agency of Development, which is a public development bank, where I was heading the environmental, social, governance and impact department. So really trying to connect these issues with the financial topics. Thank you.
Thanks, Odile.
Continue, Joe. Hi everyone, I'm Victoria Lachlan. I'm the head of Strategy, Insights and Constitution Unit in the Investment Finance Division in Scottish Government. So the reason why I'm here is, as the task was set out very clearly by the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and the Economy yesterday, that we want to create this high integrity, values-led market around natural capital. And I'm collaborating with a whole range of people in the room around how we make this happen, how we mobilize our networks. Now that we know what the destination is, how we figure out the roadmap and the path to get us there. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Victoria.
Hi, I'm Renée Kerkvliet-Hermans, for who's only just joined now. So I'm the Peatland Code coordinator for IUCN UK Peatland program. So the Peatland Code is a carbon standard it's for landowners to restore their peatlands and get carbon credits of it. So a way to get private investment into peatland restoration. The Peatland program, the IUCN UK Peatland program in general, is all about collaborating with NGOs, with government, but also the scientific community, and getting everyone around the table and working towards healthy peatlands in the UK. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Renée. So far, so good. I've only jumped in and talked over one of you so far. So, right, I'll begin before going to a few slightly more specific questions. I'm going to invite all of you to just reflect on the discussions that you've taken part in so far, be that here today or whether there's any other discussions that have taken place during COP26 relating to the topic of finance for nature, and specifically thinking about collaboration. What are the things that stand out to you most? What has made an impression on you so far around how we can collaborate to move this emerging agenda forward? So let's go back in reverse order, actually. I'm going to go straight to Renée.
Great, thanks. I think for me, what we were discussing this morning about the mismatch between project-based, landowner-based, what you need on a scale for that, and the mismatch that you need on the big scale in private investment, and how we're going to collaborate to actually bring that together and make sure that we're not losing people in that project. So very much about a need for the collaboration there instead of what we've already done, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very pertinent. Victoria, what's stood out to you most so far?
Well, one thing that I'm really pleased about is that at the COP26, nature was much more mentioned than I actually anticipated. We've got COP15 coming up, and especially in the kind of finance conversation, every single time climate was mentioned, nature was mentioned next, and it really is the next kind of frontier here, which is really great. So it's really moving towards the mainstream, which is exactly what we of course want to see. The other thing that I think I'm coming away with, I was thinking earlier, where's my head at? Well, for one, it's very full with all of the conversations that we've had, which have been really productive. I think that the collaboration aspect is really important, but I think we realize that both from the finance side in terms of the innovative finance instruments that we need, which can be quite complex, as well as from the ecological side in terms of the science, which can be quite complex, and we've got communities of practice which have high expertise. There's a real question of how we bring that together so that, and in a way that allows us to translate and also communicate that journey that we're really on. And I think that the destination is helpful there, but I think we really need a narrative so that we don't lose ourselves, because I think there's so much complex and interesting work going on, and we could all be fiddling away at the problem from different aspects. But I think we really need something that helps us tie together the road that we're all on, so that we can orient ourselves and move all of that work into the productive same direction that we need to want to see. So, and I think the conversations we've had over the past 2 days are really contributing to that. So I think, and I think from a Scottish perspective as well, that's really what we want to contribute to, convene the space, but also help to try and tell the story.
No, thank you. I think those are also very pertinent comments, and I might like to come back to one of those in a moment with a follow-up question to you all. But Odile.
I don't want to repeat what I just heard, but that's true that arriving at the COP26, and not 15, we are a small CBD delegation, and we said, but nature is everywhere. Not everyone, but everywhere. And we saw nature everywhere. And even no wind farm and so on, but nature. And our impression was that it comes from infrastructure solution to nature-based solution. And it's that's my first climate COP, but it's quite new but really good. The second thing is that finance is also everywhere with a dedicated day, and everyone is speaking of finance, the need of finance, sure, but how to finance with a lot of commitments. So, for, as you said, commitments for climate, but just after people like Mark Carney, like the head of NGFS, the network of central bank and so on, say, but yes, but nature has to be also included. So nature-based solution and other. So it comes. And so that's two different points. I think that the social point, as you say today, has not to be forgotten. But what I see, if we directly come to finance for biodiversity this time, I have the impression that there is a huge gap between these two communities, and that's also what we would like to try to make at the CBD. On the side, when we see this project, for example, there are projects on the ground, sometimes perhaps smaller projects, and I don't know where to find the money, where to find investors, except from some carbon market or some NGOs and so on, but where to find the private sector and investor who will want to take the risk to finance them. That's the first thing. And on the other side, what we perhaps more here, so the link to the finance community, so the link to the TNFD that you heard yesterday, we are really involved also in it, is that what is the market? We don't know. We don't have no data. We don't have no matrix, and so on and so on. So we can do. So in the fact, there are these two opposite sides, if I can say, and how to reconcile that and make first that they understand each other, understand the finance, understand what is a biodiversity project. So there are some taxonomy coming and so on. There is a real need of that. And that the other can find money. So to finance their projects, either smaller and more biggest project in order to go out from the business as usual and integrate biodiversity, I would say, and climate, because both are interrelated in all the business as usual and finance this necessary transition, not only protection. So that's mainly what I perhaps can say now.
Oh, thanks very much, Odile. And we'll come back and pick up on some of those points as well, I think, from all of you. Let's go to David. David Watt first.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. I think I'm cheered by the last couple of days. I tuned in virtually yesterday, so I've been here most of today. I think the real practical examples have really cheered me up, because I've constantly battled with seeing real examples of things happening and opportunities. I think that's great. I think Scotland has cheered me up, because I think Scotland really can lead the way here, genuinely. We say that in a lot of things, and we have led in the world in terms of raincoats, umbrellas and whiskey, but actually we can lead in this agenda as well. So I think there's a real opportunity for us. Without a doubt there is, and we need to drive forward with that. I think there's a couple of things about finance. I think the fact that finance has come to the fore through Rishi Sunak appearing, and what Kate Forbes said yesterday is really, really important. I think the point about them joining together will be quite nice, but we'll leave that for the moment. I just think that finance taking centre stage is really important. I went to a dinner last night actually with the UN Deputy Secretary General, and she said, really interesting, in the general climate thing, the estimate is $7 trillion a year. The UN has $150 billion to spend. So it's nothing in comparison. It almost doesn't matter. It is simply seed funding. And I think we've got to get to the point where the public sector in Scotland and Britain understands that's what it is as well. It's seed funding. It can facilitate and expedite things. It cannot do things. And then the private sector will come in. We've just had a classic example. I think there's a massive opportunity, for example, to solar farms all over Glasgow, which will relieve fuel poverty, and improve the environment thing. Very simple thing, very easy thing to do. I know people who go in there tomorrow to do that. So there's a real opportunity. And there's an interesting point also about commercial return. Maybe I'm jumping ahead. But if you look at, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's financiers in the room, so I may get it wrong, but a US Treasury bond at the moment returns over 10 years 1.5%, you know? It's not going to be difficult to return better than that through some nature-based solution for financiers over 10 or 15 years. It's really not. So the money is available, you know? Particularly at a time we're about to go into, I'm afraid personally, a fairly significant inflation, which downgrades the value of your investments. So I think people doing good, genuinely feeling as if they're doing good, investing in something that's going to return at the same time over a period of time is certainly doable. And we have in Scotland, and I always forget the figure, but literally billions and billions of pounds. It will be almost $1 trillion at least under management in Scotland. None of it is invested in Scotland. None of it. So we need to change that model as well. Sorry, it's enough for me.
Thank you, David. Some sobering points about some of the numbers there, but actually a note of real optimism about the achievability of some of this, which I would absolutely support. Okay, thank you, David Watt. Now we'll go to the other David Young.
Thanks, Jo. I mean, there has been so much to reflect on and such a diversity of perspectives. I want to build on something I think Victoria said about tying things together. Obviously, we're bringing lots of complexity together, and we're having to innovate and create new solutions for things that we haven't done before. But it needs to be done in a coherent way. And I think the need, and I think Ed Lockhart-Mummery mentioned it this morning, the need for a new architecture. And I think James Cameron also then spoke particularly about institution building and finding the roles for the different existing institutions and perhaps for new institutions. I was certainly taken by the idea of Scottish leadership. Our experience in the Financing UK Nature Recovery Initiative is Scotland's engagement with that initiative has been remarkably coherent in comparison to some, and I do think you do have a unique way of approaching the role of government with its community and with its businesses, which could provide a very interesting way of showcasing how it could be done. And you'll also be able to move hopefully more rapidly. So the last thing I was going to just comment on was the repeated voice about cracking on. We don't need more reports, we need more action. And practically, actually setting aside some money as seed money to invest in long-term nature recovery, to set up the governance structures and the market mechanisms to deliver that, will show how it can be done. And then that can be used by the private sector. You're de-risking the as James said, the institution building. You're not trying to fund nature recovery.
Oh, thank you, David. Some massively important points there about institutional architecture and so on. I would just like to also come back to one of the points that you made, Victoria, which is about the complexity of this topic, and others of you have kind of reflected the same challenge. I wanted to just ask the panel in general, whichever one of you would like to comment on this, what do you think is the least understood aspect of the conversation that we're having today about finance for nature?
Can I jump in here? Because I want to disagree with two of my panel members. This is not complex at all from the private sector's point of view. You have to either make money or save money in what you're doing. It's very simple. That's why we're in it. And we need to remove the complexities. I think we're making it too complex. It was actually mentioned in the last session. It's too complex for local communities to get involved. So that, again, as I say, the public sector, in my view, in that case, has to get in, find out who owns the land and sort it out, and then involve the community. So I think the complexities, again, the public sector can be a facilitator. Third sector probably has the ideas and the initiatives and thoughts. For the private sector, it's genuinely not complex. If you're in the private sector, you make money, and if you don't make money, you don't have a job. So it's really pretty simple. And all the rest of it just gets in the way, to be quite frank. Yeah, we might make money and have in the past in slightly misguided ways, and we need a bit more wisdom. But we're beginning to get it. But really, please just make it easy. Don't make it complex. Try and sort it out for communities and for business.
That's a brilliant challenge, David, actually. They say the worst kind of panels are where everybody agrees with each other. So thank you for completely disagreeing with the question. And I think actually it can be a trap that we can all fall into, that there obviously is a degree of complexity in there, but we can maybe make it too complicated for ourselves. I think that's a really good point from David. Did anybody else want to comment on that before we move on to another question? David Young.
I just want to furiously agree with David. I think the least understood aspect of this is how incredibly bogged down in regulatory mycelium, as a colleague of mine describes it. These projects are exhausting to get off the ground. The number of hurdles you have to overcome, the complexities and the science, the policy positions, the silos that you have to deal with, the vast quantity of uncertainty that's there. It's got to be simplified, but it's also got to be made more certain. I think that's perhaps they're two sides of the same coin. If you provide greater certainty, you will probably simplify. Although, as an investor said to me not so long ago, he said, you want to be very careful. You might provide certainty, but you might create the world's most intricate cottage industry.
No, thanks, David. And I think you may well be right that these are sort of two sides of the same coin. John Utley in the chat has pointed out that, because of the complexity that does exist, it's our job to make it simple. And that's, I think, John was saying perhaps the point that Victoria was making earlier. Just moving to a different kind of question then for a moment. What about these questions around standardization? So at the one end of the scale, you've got a strong rationale for standardized methodologies, for standards themselves that everybody has to comply with and so on. And then perhaps at the other end of the scale, you've got arguments in favor of local innovation and sort of local ownership and so on. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, because perhaps there's a sequential aspect of that. But I just wanted to ask about some of your views. Maybe if we start with Renée, do you have any views on the role of standardization in this space around finance for nature?
Yeah, so I think obviously I'm Peatland Codes coordinator. We've got the woodland carbon codes. We've got the salt marsh carbon codes being set up, farm soil carbon codes, kelps. So many codes are being set up, and there's definitely a need for coordination and standardization amongst that, because otherwise it's going to be a minefield for investors to be able to, and especially because I highlighted, to be able to get to the scale of investment that some of the bigger investors are needing, we need to aggregate projects over landscape scale. So we need to make sure that that's possible and that that's doable for people on the ground, as well as for investors to understand that they're all similarly credible and investable to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Some really good points there. Did anybody want to pick up on anything that Renée has just said? Or the broader topic of standardization?
I can do. That was on the broader topic, perhaps much more. We speak about a lot of standardization, but I think there are two different things to consider when we speak on finance for biodiversity. That's the risk part and the opportunity part. The risk part, that's how to manage the fact that all the financing are not causing too much impact on biodiversity, or also are not so dependent of biodiversity. And for that, you need to know how to do. You need to know how to assess the project that you are financing when you are financial institutions. So you need standards, or you need methodologies to be able to assess that. And if you want that it is comparable for any reason, or because you have also to report and to let know to others what you've done, yes, I think that standards are useful. First, because banks are asking for that and they don't know how to do and so on. That's what I said before. They ask for data, saying that there are no data, which is not true. There are data, a lot of data on the ground by scientific people, by NGOs and so on, a lot. But these are scientific and ecological data. That's not financial data. So there is really a need to translate that and to have translator also, either in the banks or outside. And in NGOs, in partnership with scientists and so on. So for that, yes, I really think standards are useful. For the financing part, perhaps for the carbon market and so on, that's perhaps a bit different, but at the minimum for the risk, yes, I would say yes, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much, Odile. So I think David wanted to come in there. David.
Yeah, so I think Mark Carney, in his work in the voluntary carbon sector, has had to deal with 20 years of failure to standardise. And it has impacted on confidence to such an extent that we now have this quite considerable scepticism out there about the quality of offsets and the contribution that nature-based projects can provide. And that drives the sort of push towards very, very detailed regulation and the complexity that we were just talking about. So I think in terms of quality and certainty, standardization is critical. But the other aspect is that it massively reduces transaction costs. And ultimately, if we're going to scale up nature recovery, we have to bring the cost of nature recovery down, and we need to be able to do that quickly and significantly.
No, thanks, David. So some strong support there for standardisation. Victoria, did you want to come in just there? Were you indicating?
Just to emphasise what David there said, I think standardisation is key to scale. I mean, that's what we've all talked about a lot today, is how do we get from pilot projects to aggregation to scale, and so standardisation is a key mechanism for that. I think the only other point there is, because there's a lot of activity in that space, is really important, and from a Scottish perspective as well, is to understand what's happening at international level, like through efforts like the TNFD, for example, etc., that we are really aligning, because scale of the market then matters as well, and coherence is really important from an investor's perspective too. So I think we need to all keep our sights towards the horizon to see what else is happening, so that that alignment from a standardizing perspective really can happen.
Absolutely. Well, that segues quite nicely into a question I wanted to ask. I might perhaps begin with Odile, drawing on your experience and international perspective, but thinking about a small nation like Scotland. David before highlighted the opportunity for Scotland to demonstrate leadership, but it's of course not just about Scotland, it's about other small nations, and is there greater scope there to innovate and to take things forward? What do you, from your experience, Odile, think are the most critical ways in which Scotland needs to collaborate internationally in order to play a meaningful role in the UN's decade of ecosystem restoration, thinking about how we finance all of that? Do you have any thoughts on what you think small nations such as Scotland should prioritise in terms of how they collaborate, who they collaborate with, and so on?
First of all, you do that first. Still, the Edinburgh Declaration, Edinburgh is here, for the cities, green cities, that has been signed in Edinburgh, I think, and that's a collaboration of cities of the world, or I don't know how many are there, in order to integrate more and better biodiversity in cities, perhaps related to the last panel. So you are doing things like that already, which is really a great initiative. So it could be a decline in other sectors, in either cities, or relationship between governments, relationship between financial entities with other international ones. So that's what I see for a small country, as you say, to partner with others and to either give experience of what you are doing here or take experience from others. But I would say that that's an international point, but at local level also that's important that in the government, in fact, what we see everywhere is that everyone is working in silo, more or less. And what we see, look at the CBD, for example, that's almost only ministries of environment. And it's perhaps not so well known. The climate COP is perhaps much better known. And the ministries of finance are not in. And when we speak of financing nature, they should be together and they should speak together. So at the national level, that's perhaps the first thing to say. You speak a lot of partnership between public-private, between private and NGOs, as we said before, with farmers, as you said, and so on. So that's perhaps at this level, that's perhaps the basic things to do. And after that, at the international level, to cooperate with either your sister organization or government or other type, but begin locally, I would say, if I may.
Okay, no, that's a very helpful point there, and yes, some recognition for the important collaboration that Scotland is engaging in. I wonder if I could just maybe pick up on that question, and do feel free to come back and sort of answer that specific question about Scotland and other small nations again. But what do people feel about what's not only sort of beneficial to collaborate on, but what are the areas where it's absolutely critical to collaborate? Which of the aspects of this discussion can simply not happen without collaboration? And we could argue, well, that applies across the board. Everything requires collaboration, and to some extent, I've no doubt that's true. But if we were prioritizing areas in which to collaborate, does anybody have any views?
Joe, maybe just come in a minute about Scotland. I have a great feeling, a great saying that Scotland's like a small village. And that's very positive, because literally anybody is a phone call or 2 phone calls away. Literally anybody you can speak to in Scotland, which is brilliant. So if you want to find out about something, whether it be legislation, whether it be an opportunity, who owns a bit of land, whatever it is, you can find that out relatively simply. So it is like a small village. Having said that, anybody who's ever lived in a small village will know it's got a downside, which is people criticise each other all the time and backstab and don't always cooperate the way they say they're going to cooperate, sort of things. So a bit of that challenge. And I think that Scotland's biggest challenge is to really, in this agenda, given the urgency and the timing, we have to get together. And again, go back to the last session even, I just thought, as I said during the discussion, I was slightly horrified at the obstacles. You know? We know that people of Glasgow in massive numbers are suffering fuel poverty. We've got land all round about them. We need to find out who owns it, compulsorily purchase it and start using it to their benefit. It's not complicated. We just need to start pressing the right levers, and quickly. And other things, we've allowed ourselves to take a long time to do things. We do not have time to do this. And I did, and fuel poverty in particular, a conversation with somebody over coffee there, it's now here, it's here now. Fuel poverty in this country is going to be absolutely crippling and will lead to, well, bluntly, suicides and other real social problems in the next 12 months with the price of energy, which is not going to go down dramatically. We need to do something about this now. So we've got some real pressures on us to actually get together and get going with this. So we have to do that. And as I say, the public sector is the facilitator, and we can all do it, but we need to start using our contacts, our connections, and our smallness is a real strength, but absolutely learn from other places and work with other places, even England perhaps, but we need to work together, sort of thing as well.
No, thank you, David. If any of the audience has got any questions that they would like to put to our panelists, do feel free to indicate to perhaps Ruchir if you've got anything. And if you're in the online audience, do feel free to type something into the chat. But I think David Young was about to say something. So just while people have a chance to formulate their questions, David, over to you.
Look, I'm still learning a lot about the way you're working in Scotland at the moment. So I'm not going to comment specifically about Scotland, except to say that in the private sector, when business wants to trial a new product or try out a new service in a new market, they often go to small countries. They often go to small countries because those countries have, good laws, good governance, good, transparency of behaviours. And it seems to me Scotland ticks all those boxes. And therefore, if this is indeed the global market we need it to be, and as somebody said this morning, investors are predominantly followers, there's got to be somewhere in the world that shows how it's done. And somebody's got to take that and grab that and make it happen. And it seems I've heard a lot so far that gives me a lot of encouragement that Scotland is up for that.
No, thank you, David. A really sort of interestingly made point there, actually, and I think lots to think about there. I'm going to ask Hannah and Richir whether we've got any questions from the room.
Can I just check, Joe, do you want me to take 2 or 3 questions before we come back to the panel?
Yeah, let's take a couple, shall we, Richir? Thank you.
Just before you, Bruce, can I just double check if anybody else wants to come in as well? Excellent. Okay, so we'll take Bruce and then Jeremy.
Hello, yes, Bruce Howard, directing the Ecosystems Knowledge Network, working across the UK. I'm going to pick up a little bit on the elevator challenge that Helen had earlier, and ask our panel if they were to meet a minister from some part of government in some part of the UK at COP26 over the next week or so, and that minister were to indicate that they sort of had £50 million to spare, could the panel tell us how they would advise that minister to use those £50 million in advance of accelerating nature-based finance? Keen to know your ideas.
It's a bit more of a comment, actually, Jeremy Leggett. I wanted to start the David Watt fan club here, because I think that this is just such a terribly... well, I volunteer. Just a quick thought. I've been around doing all this for so many years, for 3 decades, really, and I've been to most of the COPs. I gave a talk in Lloyd's of London in 1993 about the existential threat to the insurance industry. Many of those people, the insurers, agreed with it because of all the disasters that were happening that long ago. And the financial sector is still, all this time later, I'm going to use the word bleating about, the need to de-risk investments and all the stuff we've been talking about. So I'm in danger of shooting myself in the foot a bit, also being involved in this de-risking business with natural capital verification sites. But at some point, leadership has to emerge. People have to start saying, we are on a war footing. We need to mobilize this finance. We need to force it where it needs to go. And unless people like us, under David's leadership, are prepared to speak up and say that, the politicians will never have the nerve to intervene at the level that they need to do that. And just a final thought as well about the rising price of land, because we haven't talked about that much here at this meeting, but the way the price is going up is just so unsustainable. It's going to create a social powder keg. It's so easy to see this coming. I'm employing people who can't even afford to rent, let alone buy anything. And so that's going to require governments to step in and say, sorry, we're changing the rule book. We've got to take the heat out of this ridiculous inflation, and we're going to intervene quite radically to do it. So land reform and climate is going to require that kind of leadership, I think.
Back to you to bring in the panel.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you, Richie, but no, very powerfully made points. So I think, yes, Bruce's question, let's tackle that one. What would you say about that £50 million? Who would like to come in on that first?
I can try.
Thank you, Odile.
50 million is a lot and not a lot, in fact, for as I said, I work in a development bank, and the 50 million project is not a lot. So if you are coming at the COP 15 million regarding the, I don't know how many trillions, that's not a lot. So what I would finance with that is what you said. Examples to show to the other what can be done. So seed project, as you said, and so on. Really on the ground saying, look, it can work. It can work, but for that you need money for the project, money perhaps to buy land, money to train people, money to raise awareness of the community, if needed, of the farmers, if needed, of everyone. But really that 1-2 example, well chosen, not the same, not one in city, one in country, one I don't know, and able to show that it works, to be able to raise awareness, to reinsure the financial sector that it's possible to do that, and to reinsure also the farmers and others, people in cities and others, that it's possible. Because you don't have enough money to make big things with 15 million. Sorry to say that.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Odile. Renée, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in from a slightly different angle, because obviously in the codes, what we definitely need is scientific evidence to underpin all of these codes, to be able to actually get the private investment, to have the credibility that the emissions reductions or carbon sequestration credits are being sold are real, measurable and quantifiable. There's still a definite need for way more scientific evidence in a lot of these ecosystems to be able to get that market off the ground. So that will be the first one. And then if there's anything left, maybe looking at some kind of de-risking of that, getting a guarantee, some kind of guarantee in place for a floor price or something like that for landowners to de-risk for them to enter this kind of market.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's just try and squeeze in one more question from the room, if there is one, Ruchir. And if not, I've got a good question here from the Zoom chat, which I'm also going to just throw in.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, it's Andy Griffiths from Nestle.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, Joe. Just a quick question from my perspective. Most of the focus over the last 2 days has been around environmental outcomes. Just interested in the views of the panels. If we can get the commercial flows structured correctly, the opportunities to catalyse social and economic regeneration within those communities.
Great question. Who'd like to come in on that? Victoria, and then David.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are absolutely behind from what the Cabinet Secretary said yesterday as well, that the social and the economic are absolutely critical. And I think there's so many opportunities across the piece. I think now the challenge is how do we design the market to really capture that and really build that in, so that we've got the kind of guardrails in terms of how the market functions that we can really verifiably, not just in terms of the environmental outcomes, but also in terms of the economic and the social outcomes, show that we're really delivering against that, so that we're getting the full benefit that the money can deliver. And I think we're really interested in the kind of mechanisms that we can design to really make that happen. So yeah, we're completely, fully behind that. I think if we don't do that, then we're really missing a huge opportunity. And as many have already said, there are consequences if we don't, that we will then have to address afterwards. So it's a real opportunity to get it right.
Some great points there. Thank you, Victoria. David, really briefly, and then I'm going to have to close with the one online question. I'll give the last word to a question that's coming on Zoom. Sorry.
Spend my 50 million quid, and I'm tempted. I sort of agree that the pilot projects work, but truthfully, I'd give it to Willie Watt because I think that partnership's really, really important as well. So actually getting a bigger bang for your buck, so you can multiply your 50 million if you give it to Willie, and he gets other support in beside it as well. And I'll go back to I'm Jeremy's #1 fan as well, by the way. But it's a really interesting point actually about the implications of things like we massively need to increase council tax for second homeowners, for example. There's a lot of things that actually stack into this whole package. While I said earlier on it's simple. It's simple from a private sector. It's far from simple from a political and a public sector view. But that's one of the things we have to face up to is land is unaffordable for young people as well. As somebody, a parent of 4 and a grandparent of a growing number. a swarm, I would say, and I really worry about their future. They won't be able to afford to live in this country the way we're going. We have to sort that out as well.
Okay, now thanks very much, David. So I'm going to come on to the final question. I'm going to give you all just 20 seconds to answer this great question that's come in from Nicola Melville. Nicola says, we've talked a lot about action over the last few days. What is the panel's first action when they get back on Monday to move this agenda forward? So short, sharp, inspiring comments to finish this great session on. I'm rather sad that it's coming to an end, actually. Who would like to jump in first? Renée?
Well, I'm actually going to the Flow Country on Monday, so I won't be in the office. I'll be going with a collaboration, actually, of Landscape Finance Lab, Nature Scott, and Highland Council as well, to look at what we can do in the Flow Country in this market. So to see if we can get anything off the ground there as well. So it'll be some practical things I'm doing on Monday.
Excellent. Thank you, Renée. Victoria?
Well, Monday, COP's still going on Monday, I think. So the hypothetical question of encountering a minister at COP will not be a hypothetical on our end. So we're still on duty for that. But what we will be doing, and what I will be doing, is to reconvene with all of our partners that were actually here part of this event and discuss what we're going to do next and to figure out a roadmap. Because I think we need to order our actions now because there's lots of stuff to do. So I think we kind of are going to have a debrief, I think, and then, yeah, crack on, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, Victoria. Odile?
That will be on Tuesday, because on Monday I will be in the plane. What I have on my table is to organize a workshop. It's not to organize another event, but we did that in June, to allow financial people to speak to the CBD community. I can tell you it's complicated. That's two really different worlds. And now we want to continue and to explain to the CBD community and vice versa how they can work together and how to better integrate, because I didn't speak of that at all, the financial sector in the global biodiversity framework, which is the next framework which will be adopted at the COP15, the same as the Paris Agreement. And for now, it's not completely or not in-house, in my point of view, consistent and achievable and applicable by the financial sector and the private above all. So we have to continue to work on that.
Hugely important. Thank you, Odile. David?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I should have picked up the collaboration point a bit more. I mean, my commitment is that we will be just talking before sat down about other collaborations and how we follow this successful collaboration forward. We really need to all work together. Personally, I will be phoning back the guy who's coming to put solar panels on my roof as soon as possible, sort of thing as well. And on Wednesday, I'm having a meeting to look at form a business in this space to try and get some work done and actually do something instead of just talking about it. So I'm really keen to get going.
Great. Thanks, David. A great focus on action there. And last but not least, David Young.
Monday's going to be tied up wrestling and wrangling with some regulators over why they won't support a bundle of 10 nature-based solutions. So that's going to drag me back to reality, I'm afraid. But on Tuesday, fortunately, we have the core group for the Financing UK Nature Initiative. And I think similar to Victoria, it's time to really turn the focus to implementation. We know what the barriers are. We know what the solutions are. Yes, there's data that needs to be obtained. Yes, there are complexities to be overcome, but we just cannot underestimate the urgency and the need to crack on with it.
Thank you, David. Well, that's a very apt note to finish on. So huge thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you for the great questions. Apologies for the questions I didn't get to. I would quite happily have listened to the panel for a lot longer, but thank you very much to all of you.